Good morning, grade 11s. We're carrying on with module 3.1, which falls under the section Social Implications, and we're going to be looking at ICT and Society. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit more what ICT exactly is a little bit further down, but let's jump straight into the chapter here, and we're going to start with policies, restrictions, and firewalls. Now, these three are somewhat similar to each other, but they are different. Let's just start with this little bubble. When you connect to a network, you find that you are unable to print to a printer that you know exists, or perhaps you are restricted from connecting to Facebook, or you are unable to download files. Then you are seeing this type of network use management in action. So let's start with policies. What is a policy? Now, you may have learned in another subject or from somewhere else that a policy is a set of documents that stipulate what you can or cannot do in a company or business. They also use the word policy for that. But here in computers, regarding ICT, policies mean something slightly different. So let's get it right. Settings in server software is called policies. So what do they mean, settings in server software? So if you look at like something like an IT or CAT lab, the computers are controlled or managed by a server. You log into the network, you log into your account, your profile to do work via the server, even though you may not see the server, but that's how it works. So if the server has certain settings, it can restrict you or enable you to do things that perhaps another person cannot do. So, did they tell you about the word policy being used for another term? But we're not talking about that. So these settings can be used to control almost every aspect of what the user can or cannot do on the network. This range from setting a limitation on how long or short a password has to be when you create a password, or how often you have to change a password. Some systems require you to change your password every 6 weeks, every 6 months, every year, things like that. And also whether you have access to certain folders or not. So when we say policies, we're talking about settings in a server that restrict users, not just restrict them, but also maybe set certain rules that they have to follow, like the minimum password length, etc. All right, so that's policies. Now, what about restrictions? How is restrictions different, or how is it similar? Restrictions refer to limiting user activity and controlling access by changing settings in software or hardware. Restrictions can be applied to individuals or groups of users. So we can immediately see that restrictions here also kind of falls underneath policies, but it's different in the sense that here we're talking just about restricting users from doing something, right? Either a group, like for instance, all the students in the school have a certain group restrictions. They are allowed to do certain things and they're not. The teachers in the school, they have their own set of restrictions, things that they're not allowed to do, etc. So when we talk about restrictions, we're talking specifically about controlling access to folders, access to files, etc. Here at Westring, we have a T drive called, well, it's called the T drive, but it stands for test, the test drive, where you submit things to the teachers. So for instance, if you have to submit your PAT project, we'll say put it on the T drive. Now if you go ahead and paste your PAT folder structure with all the files inside of it on the T drive, as soon as you've pasted it, you will not be able to change it. You will not be able to change the name of the folder. You won't even see the files inside the folders. They will all appear to be empty. That's because you are restricted. You are only allowed to paste or to put something onto the drive. You're not allowed to see the files that are there, and you're not allowed to modify them in any way. So moving on to the third one here, firewalls can be hardware, but more often than not, it's software. So what do I mean by this? In big servers situations, big networks, they might want to implement a physical hardware firewall, which has more capabilities, it's faster, etc. But for our use at schools and medium to small businesses, things like that, a software firewall does the job. Right, so it's slower than a hardware, but a hardware firewall is very expensive. It's meant for huge industrial applications. So software firewall does the same thing. Now, what does a firewall do? Some people get confused between a firewall and an antivirus system. An antivirus program or software is designed to find, identify, block, delete, quarantine viruses and malware in general. But a firewall does not do that. A firewall does not look for malware. A firewall is simply a set of rules, and it monitors a specific connection. It monitors what goes in, it monitors what goes out. It doesn't really care if what's coming in or out is a virus or not, or malware or not. It just monitors a set of rules to see if that traffic is allowed to pass or not. Think of it like a police officer. If you have a specific pass on you, if you have your ID book, you are allowed through. But if you don't, they say no, block. They don't care what you're here to do, whether it's good or bad, but you can't come in, you can't pass because you don't have the relevant documentation. So that's what a firewall does. It monitors a connection. Usually it stands on the perimeter of your network, like the school's network, and the wider general network like the internet, and it monitors what's trying to come in, it monitors what's trying to come out, and based on its set of rules, it will either allow it or it will block it. Right, so that was our policies, restrictions, firewalls. The end user agreement or acceptable use policy. Let's see here. While certain basic technical controls can be put in place, it's also important to tell users what is acceptable and what is not. So an acceptable use policy is usually a written document that a person has to sign or give some sort of affirmation that they have read it and they accept it. It usually pops up when you're installing new software or you want to enter something, and then that thing pops up, says please read the policies, and then you just scroll to the bottom and say okay, and you go. Usually we don't even read it, but it's important to at least read some of these things once just to get an idea of what's inside. So let's have a look. Acceptable use policy is a code of conduct educating users and governing their behavior. So in certain circumstances, it will tell you what you can and what you can't do. It will also tell you what the punishment will be if you have to transgress the rules. So all of that is included. Right. Details on when and where portable storage devices like flash drives may or may not be used. Details of restrictions about installing hardware or software. Right. So it's in writing. It's telling you that you can or you cannot install certain software or hardware. There may still be technical things put in place like the policies or the restrictions that will automatically block the new software, but together with that, we also have the acceptable use policy, which is in writing telling you that you're not allowed to do it in the first place. Right. Also, it contains hints on how to avoid plagiarism and to break copyright law. So it doesn't just tell you what you can and cannot do, it also gives you some advice, some tips on what to do in certain circumstances. All right, moving on. Where does ICT make the biggest difference? So there's a couple of different things here where ICT affects these certain things. Read through them, but let's go through one or two. So let's start with the shrinking globe. Right, you all know a situation where you meet somebody, they tell you something about somebody else, and you find, hey, I'm actually related to that person, and then somebody says, wow, it's a small world out there. So it's kind of like that. Improved communication means that the world has becoming a quote-unquote smaller. A few centuries ago, very few people knew much about the world other than what they experienced on their day-to-day lives in their city. If you think, let's use an example. If you think about Elvis Presley, right? So he was in America, that's where he lived, he made music, and today he's known around the world, people still listen to his music. But back in those days, 1950s, and if we're sitting in South Africa, how would we listen to his music? It was definitely not live, that's for sure. what they would do is they would obviously make a record, they would ship that record to the various countries where they think it will sell, like South Africa, and you can go to the shop and you can buy it there. But that would usually only take place after a few months after a specific concert or a recording session. So it would definitely not be live or recent. You would be a few months behind because you live in a different part of the world. Today, that's not the case. Today, when somebody has a concert or a meeting or some sort of online activity, there's so many different, even informal ones, like Twitch. You can watch people game, your favorite games live. As they're playing, you can comment, you can watch. And so it appears as if the person is in your same room or they're in the same area as you. And because of this, languages like English is now worldwide. Basically, it makes the world seem like a smaller place and not so foreign. Right, so there's a couple of different things over here on how ICT is affecting the world. Read through them. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of them. We're going to skip down to the capabilities and the limitations of ICT. Now, before we carry on here, I just want to go over what is ICT. So I stands for information, C stands for communication, and the T stands for technology. Now, why do we have all three of these things in one concept? Because if you have just the T, if you just have technology, let's think a toaster, right? So that's the technology, and it has a purpose. It toasts bread, but it doesn't communicate with anything, and it doesn't process any information. So it's not going to exactly help you make your next business decision, right? It's just going to toast your bread, and that's fine. Today, though, let's look at our cell phone. So our cell phone is obviously the technology, our smartphone, but it also processes information. We can make a list, a shopping list. We can enter some things into an app, and it can process the information and give us a result. And we can communicate that result to other people. So our smartphone is a great example of ICT. So you can get things done, right? Beyond just doing one specific thing. Back in the day, cell phones, you could say that they don't really process information that much. What I mean is the first cell phones that came on the scene, they SMS'd and they made phone calls. So the technology was there, the communication was there, but they didn't really process information on your behalf. You couldn't open up Excel spreadsheets, work on the go like you can today. So yeah, that's what we're talking about when we speak of ICT. So what is ICT capable of? ICT can contribute a number of things to society, and they have a little bullet list over here. Go through it, have a look at it. What's more interesting is what ICT is limited by, and these are important to know because they can even affect us on our daily lives. So, poorly written and designed software systems. Many software systems are poorly designed and contain bugs. Now, all software has bugs, but some of them haven't been sifted and removed. In addition, they may force the user to adapt their internal systems to the limitations of the program. So this is obviously what we want with ICT, with technology and all that stuff, is we want to streamline our processes and make things more efficient. So if there's problems in the software, and if we have to adapt ourselves to work around those problems, we're kind of losing out in that regard. Information overload and the need to verify information. So usually, well, not usually, in the past, a couple of years ago, when somebody posted information on a public forum, you could have relatively assumed that they took the time to make sure that what they're posting is accurate. But today, with so many forums available to us, so many social media outlets, people are just posting and people are sharing these posts without even reading it twice. So we need to verify information, and also the fact is that we have so much information coming in. What is useful and what is not useful? And this is what they talk about information overload over here. Profitability. Availability of skilled people. You always hear that there's so many jobs outstanding, so many people need to fill the position of programmer and blah, blah, blah. And poor supporting infrastructure. As we discussed earlier, poor or expensive infrastructure limits the application of ICT. Fear of ICT. People are afraid of ICT because they have insufficient knowledge and exposure to it. So they don't know. A perfect example is 5G. So the 5th generation of cellular technology is wireless technology. It has already been established in first world countries, and it's moving around. It's even available in Cape Town at the moment, and it's spreading around South Africa and around the world. People have linked 5G to the outbreak of the coronavirus, and even when 4G and 3G came, people linked that with cancer and etc., etc. But as time passes, people become more familiar with it, more used to it, and then those fears pass. But so fear of ICT is a real thing. And that is this chapter. Right? We'll stop over here and we'll carry on next time.